So Lara Lesmes and Fredrik Hellberg are from Space Popular. Space Popular is directed by them, and the practice creates physical spaces, buildings, interiors, furnishings, and virtual architecture, concentrating on how the two will be fused in the future. Lara and Fredrik are visiting professors at Daniels, University of Toronto, and in the past years have led master studios at the Architectural Association in London and INDA in Bangkok. Also, they presented at my school, the Städelschule, in the last year. So I think I've attended some of the online conferences. Welcome so much to TIFA, and I'm so excited to have you here. Hello from India.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. So great to be here.
Yes, it's a real honor to be invited to participate in Cyberia 2021. Thank you all so much for inviting us, for having us here today. So I think without further ado, we will go straight into our presentation.
Mm-hmm. So, as introduced, we are Space Popular. Just to give a little bit of context to our practice. We founded our practice in 2013 as we were based in Bangkok for several years, and we were there because we were teaching. So teaching and practicing has always run in parallel for us. We started at INDA, Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok, and later on at the Architectural Association in London, and now in Daniels Faculty of Architecture of the University of Toronto. Just to give a little bit of context of what we do besides what we are going to talk about today, we are architects also in the more conventional sense of the word. We build buildings and work on interiors. We have also developed 2 furniture collections in the past years. And as many architects, we have participated in several competitions working on buildings at many different scales, from cultural centers to museums to whole neighborhoods or even national pantheons. We are also very interested in developing the architecture of virtual worlds, places where people can gather remotely. And on this line of work, there's also another aspect in which we work with projects that speculate on the future of the city, the home, all kinds of spatial environments in the coming of immersive media. So here are a few images of some of the projects we have developed that have been research that ends up in exhibition works at different museums or cultural institutions that usually involve a physical installation together with an immersive piece. So today we will be running through these 5 topics, and with those we hope to show what are our ideas and our predictions most on what is the future of architecture in the coming of immersive media.
So as a kind of introduction, we will start by showing some images of our most recent project, which is an artwork for Maxi in Rome, which uses the futurist artist Giacomo Balla as a starting point. And it very well, we think, kind of puts forward our view on virtual environments and our interest in media and the history of media. These are stills from the film, which is currently exhibited at Maxi, which kind of looks at and kind of puts together some of these interests that Lara was just introducing, such as virtual surfaces and virtual spaces, and how we might have to completely rethink what a space even is in the 21st century. In this example, in this project, we also created a virtual environment where you can move around the artwork completely independently. The link can be found on Maxi's website, completely made up of what can be referred to as 360 spheres, which are indeed just surfaces, but by the nature of how they are wrapped around spheres, they become rooms in their own right. And kind of as a big statement, we wanted to begin today by throwing out this kind of statement, which kind of underlines a lot of the work that we do, is that by the middle of the 21st century, meaning by 2050, all media will be spatial. And by this, we mean that all media will be perceived through some form of augmented or virtual glasses, meaning also then no more smartphones, no more laptops or monitors of any kind. And this kind of underlines the way that we work with speculative projects like this, Root Domain, which is a speculative project looking at the future of the museum, information flows around the world. We're also really interested in data representation. There's a project, one of our earliest ones in this line of work from 2013 called the Cloud of Resilience, which put forward a model for how to convey complex sets of data related to mortality rates on a global scale. Coming back a bit more to the direct nature of how we work, in almost all of our exhibitions that Lara was showing some slides of earlier, we use VR headsets, as you can see here. And also what Lara was introducing was this location sensitive VR, which we can see here on the bottom left hand side, where we can see the hand interacting with a very physical glass sculpture from an exhibition in 2017, while you're actually perceiving and seeing something else. This is something we started experimenting with students in Bangkok, Thailand in 2015, because we're really interested in how the fact that even if you are engulfed in a virtual environment, your body is still somewhere. You're never leaving your body behind completely. So here are some photographs of that exhibition. The first one, where we, in an exhibition format, used a VR headset. And the way that we work with the headsets is that we develop what we have come to refer to as spatial essays. They're essentially films that you perceive within the headset. So they are telling a story of specifically what the exhibition is about. And you can move around in that film. Here are 4 of our most recent spatial essays, of which we will talk a little bit more in detail about a few of them.
One example of one of these pieces is the Wardian case, which we developed for the tapestry room in the Royal Palace of Milan. We were particularly interested in this room. Our pieces are always highly contextual. And we're particularly interested in the tapestry room because we see tapestry as a medium that precedes immersive media, right? As the sort of USB of the time, and a simple way to transfer information or to allow information to travel with you. So the exhibition ended up being composed of a large sculpture that sits in the middle of the space that gives you access to an immersive film. What that immersive film is portraying is the myth that is contained in those tapestries, and it's bringing it to you in another medium. So you are taken through several ideas, both about the myth, but also about immersive media itself, through an immersive film in which a guide is basically accompanying you and telling you those stories. Usually the way we do this is also quite interesting for us, because both the body language and the voice are ours, and usually mixing the two of us, one of us would do the body, the other one would do the voice. But also this is something that allows us to explore ideas of what it means to be present in the virtual.
So this notion of being together with someone else in virtual spaces, of course, on the topic of the symposium of the space of video games, a lot of that relates to both what it's like to be with other creatures or other entities, or indeed in multiplayer games, or in our context, in our research, with other human beings through avatars using VR headsets, such as in the platform VR Chat and many others. And we're very interested in this notion of virtual togetherness, or what it means to be together in a virtual space. And this is something that we have explored in a few different projects. We'll show a few of those. One of those is called the Venn Room, which we developed for the Tallinn Architecture Biennale in 2019, which again, it's a series of fabrics that are portraying a domestic environment and a spatial essay accessible through a VR headset. And really what this project was looking at and connects very much to our general interest is again on the looking at media and how media in the past have affected us and our forms of being together or connecting with other people, and how it might change in the future. And again, looking at this proposition that all media will be spatial in the future. And what this will mean is that essentially every single object that you can view or look at has the potential to be smart in the sense of the term smart city or smart objects, etc. Things don't need to be connected to any form of electricity. And basically, if we all wear VR headsets or indeed in augmented reality glasses on a daily basis, then what we realized and what we've been looking at is how the home that you are in now, or the home that we happen to be in now, you see a little bit of the background we have here, and we bring a bit of that into you, to your homes, wherever you happen to be. But if it becomes spatial, then that means that both of our homes or the two environments we're in, they start to overlap, creating what we call a Venn room, which would then, we were looking at kind of creating all sorts of quite strange situations, quite involuntary and undesigned situations. But some of these situations might then, we propose, become very meaningful, and we might begin to decorate them or ornament them and make them more meaningful. This is the way that my wall and your wall overlaps. And what this and then in turn would create is something of a global home where all of our homes are globally overlapping and moving around in strange and interesting constellations.
And this overlapping notion is something we looked at also on an earlier project at the scale of the city, instead of looking just at the home. And in this case was basically like exploring the idea of what will be the augmented city. For this project at Arctes in Stockholm, curated by James Taylor Foster, we developed 10 propositions for virtual architecture that you can see here. And we developed an exhibition that is actually quite minimal. It consisted on a series of hanging printed fabrics that created a space where one could explore the different, how the different environments could change as they were augmented. The way the space is organized was something quite interesting for us because the space itself becomes a diagram that organizes these these 6 different environments in relationship to a center. And that what that center is what we were calling the point of maximum virtuality or maximum augmentation. So as we look at the different environments, in this case, for example, the home, we would see a gradient from the environment of the home as it is today to an augmented environment of the home, each of them following a different topic. For example, in the case of the home itself, the idea of the home as a space of broadcast, both broadcasting in and broadcasting out, as well as we see here some examples of City Hall that is currently, through its mosaics, telling stories of medieval knights and whatnot. And we suggested how it could be implemented with then maybe more up-to-date and ever-changing stories and achievements to be celebrated on top of those, and therefore overlapped with those.
And related to all of this is, in our view, the issue of style, which is something that we explored in this exhibition called Freestyle, Architectural Adventures in Mass Media, which just closed. It reopened after the pandemic, which put forward questions of the relationship between mass media and style and architecture in the context of Britain, specifically. The exhibition was housed at the Royal Institute of British Architects headquarters in central London, and it is very much a physical exhibition that later on became virtual, which we'll talk a bit about in the end. Here are some very recent photographs of the whole exhibition as a whole, which has a few different parts. As you can see, a very large digitally printed carpet, a large physical model, and several collection objects. And you can also see some VR headsets in this photograph. So we'll go through a little bit of how all of this kind of came together. At the starting point, and we think it's interesting to bring you into how we thought about going about this big question, was the very famous book by Sebastiano Serlio, written and published in Venice in the middle of the 16th century. And in the West, it was the first mass media object about architecture, which had illustrations. It's incredibly significant. This was written about by Mario Carpo, who wrote about architecture in the age of printing, and the fact that before books, if you wanted to see a building, you literally had to move your body to that building itself if you wanted to see it. So buildings could not travel at this time, so people had to, if you wanted to go and see them. It's a quote from Mario Carpo there. So the book in that sense becomes a vehicle for buildings to travel in. The exhibition looks at this very ambitious timescale of 500 years since the introduction of the book, the first mass media object, and onwards.
And the way we do so is through this set of categories that eventually lead to large databases where we start identifying patterns when we compare the parallel development of mass media and architectural styles. And from those, we select a series of information, both information that concerns overview, that is shown in this large physical model, and information that is shown through particular stories that are from objects from the collection. So it's again another space that is a diagram, a space of information that is organized to be easily read. The whole room is organized as a timeline where every year is 3 centimeters, so it's highly regular. You can at any point locate where you are in time in relationship to where you are in space. And the carpet is containing various sets of information, one of them being the different styles that vary according to these different shifting colors in the carpet. And it also has figurative motifs that are showing the different types of media in the different periods of time. So as one is moving through, you look down and you can have an understanding or like a reading of the timeline of the style that is taking place, of the different artifacts. And at the same time, you have access to the actual stories and arguments very directly presented through an immersive film in 4 acts.
And these 4 acts, they are seen through 4 different headsets. The first one being at the beginning of the model, where when you put it on, here we have again a little virtual guide. As you can see here, you're introduced to Serlio and the first pattern books that arrived in the 16th century to England, and the kind of architecture that architects built at the time that were inspired by these books. Act 2 covers the very important time in history where books really started to become translated. So again, here you wear a headset, you're standing in front of the model, the guide is here constantly to take you through. It then, of course, introduces the very crucial part of the history of colonialism, where in England, many things started to come back to England, creating things like this, The Gram of Ornament, the incredible book by Owen Jones, and eventually also introducing you to the hardware that made real virtual travel possible for the first time, photography and the related technologies. Act 3 covers the 20th century, where we're introduced to cinema and the television, and how the spaces we saw in the television, like television sets, started to really inspire back the style that we created in our buildings and our homes. And then, of course, the media that we brought into the home that were more interactive, such as video games, and what that later on started to create. And then in the 4th act, the final act, we look at the future of spatial media and what that will be able to enable when it comes to style and architecture.
These speculations might be a few years ahead. However, we are also exploring the virtual realm as it is today. This is an example of a gathering in the platform, social VR platform VR Chat, by one of our students at the Architectural Association, where you see everybody coming together represented as avatars. And that's not a sole example. There are several platforms where one can work with this. We have a particular interest in Mozilla Hubs because it is an open source platform, and the whole Mozilla Foundation has a manifesto towards a healthy internet, which we find very important. So when working on the Freestyle exhibition for the RIBA, we actually developed together with curator Shumi Bose an educational program to introduce young people to sort of the back end of how the virtual realm is created. And we also ended up finding this really important for ourselves as the exhibition opened in late February 2020. And going back to this quote of how buildings could not travel, so people had to, we then opened the exhibition and found ourselves in a moment where people could not travel, so buildings had to. And we started developing worlds where people actually could come together and start considering what is the architecture for remote gathering. We also brought forward the Freestyle exhibition itself online. And then just a few months later, in autumn 2020, we had the our first commission for a virtual piece of architecture, which was a chunk of a city. This was for the Arquia Festival, developed by the Arquia Foundation in Spain, and that year curated by Gonzalo Delicado, which usually takes this shape. People comes together, it's a generation of architects that are receiving awards and so on, and they really create a generational bond amongst themselves. So we were asked to create a space where not only the conference could be held, the festival itself could be held, but there could also be works exhibited, and more importantly, people could come together. So here you see a few of those galleries that were created following ideas of the intended location, which was Barcelona. And here is the arena, the space where everyone could come together to attend lectures like we're doing today, but actually coming together as avatars. What this brings, as opposed to maybe the way in which we're gathering now, is that we come together in 3D space. And as avatars come closer to each other, sound is spatial, and therefore we encounter a possibly much more natural way of interacting and of encountering others or behaving as a crowd.
And to conclude, we'll show a project which we did in 2019, which connects to the research we're doing now for our next show. This is a public artwork for together with MMCA at Doksugung Palace in Seoul, South Korea, which is placed in the gate into the Emperor's private bedchambers, an incredible site where we put an LED screen that covers the actual entrance into the actual bedchamber. It looked like this, where basically you are, as a viewer, experiencing a series of portals or series of doors that open one after another. And we put forward this kind of question, or this sort of proposition, that portals or doors before mass media used to be actual doors where you couldn't pass through, whereas today the gates that leads to the most revered places are virtual, to the sort of chat rooms and the sort of places where we actually, many of us work and live, and the doors to buildings are less and less important. So the film then shows a kind of chronological history of media portals as they have evolved all the way leading up to smartphones and onwards. And this leads towards the research which we're currently doing for a new exhibition opening in June in London, which is on the history of magical and virtual portals on a global scale. So keep an eye on our Instagram account to see details of this show and our next project. And with this, we've covered a few different areas, and we thank you all very much for listening, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. I think you're muted, Anokhi.
Sorry. Okay, again, thank you. That was great. Very visually stimulating. Just going to go through, I think we have 2 questions and one single question that I have that I'm going to ask all our speakers. Anuj asked, how do you think the act of socializing would change in the future with the level of augmentation you predict?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. I mean, I think one can see patterns already in seeing how socializing keeps changing just by the level of augmentation we have today, right? When we meet somebody, there are many ways that we might have been introduced to that person before, or that we might continue to meet afterwards that are not necessarily purely physical. I think there is something to note that is quite interesting, which is what is happening now in, for example, in social VR spaces, but also in dating platforms and so on, which is the creation of sites that are specific for going in and meeting people, right? I mean, people is most accustomed to perhaps dating apps, but in social VR, we find virtual spaces that have as a mission only to just go in and possibly meet people and hang out. Those spaces have more often than not really not a or like they're not directed towards dating per se. It's really like literally to go and find people to hang out with. And there tends to be there's a tendency to compare them to public space. However, I think I can speak for both of us in saying that what it does is that it questions the nature of our physical public spaces, where maybe, I mean, in certain cultures, it would be quite strange that someone came up to you to meet you without being introduced by somebody else, right? And somehow virtual spaces are breaking these rules by being not just a space between homes or like the leftover space in between buildings in a city, but actually being spaces where we intentionally go to see others. So I think this is quite telling in the sense of what might change with regards to how we socialize, and possibly having a blending of this, or seeing more and more spaces that are specifically programmed to come together and meet, I think could be something quite interesting, and something that could break a lot of barriers that are now maybe set by social structures. No, like you belong to certain circles, and if you don't, you will not have a way in. So I think it could change quite considerably the social fabric of the city. It will also come with a lot of problems, a lot of potential for bullying, for abuse of all new kinds. And that is something that we need to think very carefully. It will also enable commercial forces at a completely new level of force that we also need to be prepared to shield ourselves from. But at the same time, I think it might, like, I see that we already start witnessing quite positive aspects in changing how we meet each other and how we are enabled to approach one another.
I think we're cutting short on time. So I think the last question that I'm going to ask all our guest speakers is there any video game that you are currently playing, or a video game that you like? And also, what are you guys currently reading?
Good questions. Although, of course, the tools we use and the world we're interacting with is very heavily connected to the world of gaming.
Mm-hmm.
I think we would have to admit that our career has not really allowed for as much gaming as we would have wished. Although we did a lot of gaming, let's say, earlier in our lives. I think now we're enjoying. They're called, essentially, they refer to it from the community as games, which are the social VR platforms like VR Chat, etc., that has many games inside of them. So I think a lot of those that we really enjoy, the most recent game that we played, perhaps that we really, really enjoyed as one of the best games I've ever played, was Half-Life Alyx, which is a VR only game, which we massively enjoyed. And in terms of what we are reading right now, a lot of the stuff that we're reading is about the sort of debate over issues of virtual space in relationship to physical space. I can recommend a really good text. It's not super new, but by Jaron Lanier, called Why is the Square Square, which is actually a short text about questioning why we are using virtual spaces and the way we're using them in relationship to how we've used physical spaces in the past. And we're reading also a lot of more sort of old-fashioned style historical nonfiction about the history of media, etc., that are not necessarily critiquing the current situation, but just historically just learning as much as we can from the past.
Sounds great. Thank you. I think that's all.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Very happy to have had you here. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for inviting us. Thanks, everyone.